The storm came without warning. One moment the sky above the forest moon was gray and heavy, and the next it cracked open like a broken shell, pouring rain so thick that Ewan could barely see his own hand in front of his face. The wind screamed through the trees, bending them sideways, snapping branches like dry sticks. The comm unit on his belt crackled twice and then went completely silent. Ewan stopped walking and looked around. The rest of the survey team was gone. He was not afraid. He had been in worse situations than this. He was a field medic, trained by the Coalition to stay calm when everything around him fell apart. He had stitched wounds on moving ships, treated broken bones on alien planets, and once kept a two-headed Crethely soldier alive for 6 hours with nothing but a field kit and a piece of wire. A storm on a forest moon was not going to be the thing that finished him. He pulled his jacket tighter and kept moving. The trees here were enormous. Their trunks were wider than houses, their roots rising out of the ground like the backs of buried monsters. The ground between them was soft and wet, swallowing his boots with every step. Rain ran down the back of his neck and soaked through his collar. He could hear thunder rolling somewhere far above the clouds, low and constant, like the moon itself was growling. He tried the comm again. Static. Nothing. He kept walking. It was the smell that stopped him first. Something was burning. Not wood. Not leaves. Something deeper and stranger, like hot metal left too long in a fire, mixed with something wet and iron-sharp. Ewan slowed his steps. His hand moved without thinking to the medic kit on his side. Old habit. Wherever there was a smell like that, there was usually something hurt. He pushed through a curtain of hanging roots and stopped at the edge of a slope. Below him was a crater. It was wide and deep, like something enormous had fallen from the sky and carved the earth open when it landed. The trees around it had been knocked flat, their trunks pointing outward like spokes on a broken wheel. Rain was pooling at the bottom, dark and steaming slightly. The smell was stronger here, rising up from below in slow, heavy waves. And in the middle of the crater, half buried in mud and broken wood, was the dragon. Ewan had seen pictures. Every Coalition medic was given basic training on the large species of the known galaxy, just enough to identify them and stay out of their way. He knew what a veil theory was. He knew they were rare. He knew they were dangerous. He knew that most people who had ever seen one up close had seen it from a very great distance, through the window of a ship, and had counted themselves lucky. He had never expected to be standing 10 meters above one in the rain. She was enormous. Even collapsed on her side, half swallowed by the mud, she was bigger than anything Ewan had ever stood near. Her wings were folded badly against her body, one of them bent at an angle that made Ewan's stomach tighten just looking at it. Her tail stretched out behind her and disappeared into the dark water at the bottom of the crater. Her claws were half buried in the mud, curled inward like she had tried to hold on to something and failed. But what caught his breath was the color of her. She was white. Not pale gray, not faded silver, white. Pure, clean white like fresh snow, like the inside of a shell. Her scales should have been gleaming. Instead they were cracked. Long dark lines ran through them like broken glass, and from the cracks came a slow dark bleeding that mixed with the rainwater and spread across the mud in thin red rivers. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven pulls, each breath sounding wet and heavy and wrong. She was dying. Ewan stood at the edge of the crater for exactly 3 seconds. Then he heard the crying. It was small. High and thin and desperate, the kind of sound that reached inside a person and pulled. He looked to the left of the dragon's body and saw them, 3 hatchlings, each one no bigger than a large dog, pressed together against their mother's side. Their scales were pale and damp, their small wings folded tight against their bodies. They were shaking. One of them kept pushing its head against the dragon's leg over and over, as if trying to wake her up. Another sat completely still, staring at nothing, making that thin, broken sound. Ewan was already moving before he made the decision to move. He half slid, half climbed down the slope of the crater, catching himself on broken roots and loose rock. His boots hit the mud at the bottom and sank immediately. He pulled himself forward, moving carefully, keeping his body low, keeping his movements slow. He did not want to frighten them. He did not want to make anything worse. He stopped a few meters away and crouched down. The hatchlings saw him. 2 of them scrambled back, pressing harder against their mother. The third one, the smallest, just stared at him with enormous pale eyes that caught the gray light and held it. Ewan stayed still. He let them look at him. He kept his hands open at his sides. Then he reached for his comm unit and pressed the channel. Petra. Static. Petra, this is Ewan, come in. More static. Then, faintly, a crackle of a voice. He adjusted the frequency. Petra. I need you to hear me. I am at the bottom of a crater about 2 kilometers south of the survey marker. I have found a Veiltheri female, adult, critically injured. She is alive but not for long. I need Dr. Soren here now. A long pause. Then Petra's voice, thin through the storm. Ewan. Say that again. A Veiltheri. White female, adult. She is badly hurt. 3 hatchlings present. I need the doctor. Another pause, longer this time. Then he heard Petra talking to someone else, her voice muffled. Then Dr. Soren's voice came through, flat and certain. Ewan. Listen to me carefully. Do not touch that animal. A Veiltheri in distress is one of the most dangerous situations a field team can encounter. You need to move away from the crater and wait for us to reach your position. She is dying, Ewan said. I understand that, Dr. Soren said. But there is nothing to be done. The Veiltheri are a protected species. We are not equipped to treat an animal of that size or biology. The best thing you can do is move away and let nature take its course. Ewan looked at the 3 small hatchlings pressed against their mother's side. He looked at the smallest one, still staring at him with those pale, quiet eyes. Come to my position, he said. Please. He clipped the comm to his belt and did not move away. He moved closer instead. He approached slowly, giving the hatchlings time to adjust to him. The 2 that had scrambled back watched him with wide, nervous eyes, but they did not run. The smallest one still had not moved at all. Ewan crouched beside the mother dragon's head and looked at her properly for the first time. Her face was broad and long, her jaw partly resting in the mud. The scales around her eyes were cracked worse than anywhere else, and the dark bleeding there was heavier. Her nostrils moved with each shallow breath, pulling in short bursts of air that fogged in the rain cold. Her teeth were just visible behind her lip, white and very still. Ewan reached out and very gently placed 2 fingers against the side of her neck, just below the jaw, the way he had been taught to find a pulse on large species. Was there. Slow. Too slow. And uneven, skipping in a way that told him something inside her was working very hard just to keep going. He sat back on his heels and let out a long breath. Then the dragon moved. It was small, just her eye, just the lid pulling slowly open. The eye beneath was pale, the color of ice over deep water, shot through with very faint gold near the center. It moved across the mud, across the rain, across the 3 small shapes pressed against her side. Then it found Ewan. She looked at him. Not in the way a wounded animal looks at something it does not understand. Not with fear and not with anger. She looked at him the way someone looks when they have already accepted what is coming, when they are not looking for help anymore but just looking because looking is all that is left. Ewan looked back. The rain kept falling. The hatchlings kept crying. And somewhere far above the clouds, the thunder rolled on, low and slow, like the moon was trying to say something that had no words. Ewan did not move. Dr. Soren arrived 20 minutes later. He came down the slope of the crater carefully, holding a scanner in one hand and a light in the other, his long gray coat already soaked through with rain. Behind him came Petra, her dark hair plastered flat against her face, and young Kale, the newest member of the survey team, who stopped at the edge of the crater and stared at the dragon with his mouth open for a full 5 seconds before remembering to climb down. Ewan was still crouched beside the dragon's head when they reached him. Dr. Soren did not say anything at first. He walked slowly around the dragon's body, scanner raised, moving the device in long careful sweeps. His face was calm in the way that experienced doctors learn to keep their faces calm, not because they feel nothing but because showing what they feel does not help anyone. He scanned her chest. He scanned her wings. He scanned the long cracked line of her spine and the dark bleeding along her sides. Then he lowered the scanner and looked at the results for a long, quiet moment. Then he looked at Ewan. She has 3 broken internal support ribs, he said. His voice was flat and even. Her secondary lung is partially collapsed. The membrane around her primary heart is swollen with fluid. She has deep tissue damage across 60% of her left side, and her neurological response in her rear limbs is almost completely gone. He paused. She is dying. There is no version of this situation where she does not die. Ewan said nothing. I want you to understand that I am not being careless, Dr. Soren continued. I have been a physician for 22 years. I have treated 41 different species across 9 coalition sectors. I am telling you with complete certainty that there is nothing in my kit, nothing in our ship's medical bay, and nothing in any coalition medical database that covers treatment for a Veiltheri of this size with injuries this severe. We do not have the equipment. We do not have the biology files. We do not even have the right scale of tools. He looked down at the dragon. The kindest thing we can do is make sure she does not suffer more than she already is. Petra put a hand on Ewan's shoulder. He's right, she said quietly. I'm sorry. Ewan looked at the 3 hatchlings. They had not moved from their mother's side. The smallest one was still watching him, still making that thin high sound that had not stopped since he first heard it. He reached down and opened his medic kit. Dr. Soren frowned. Ewan. I heard you, Ewan said. Then you understand that. I heard you, Ewan said again, and his voice was not rude and it was not loud and it was not angry. It was just steady. He pulled out a roll of thermal sealing gel, the kind used for burns and heat wounds, and looked at the cracked scales along the dragon's side. You can stay or you can go. But I am going to work. Dr. Soren opened his mouth. Then he closed it. He stood very still for a moment, the rain running off the brim of his hood, and then he took one step back and crossed his arms and watched. Kale looked at Petra. Petra looked at Dr. Soren. Nobody left. Ewan started with the bleeding. He could not close the cracks in her scales, they were each longer than his arm and the edges were hard as stone. But he could slow what was coming out of them. He pressed the thermal gel along the worst of the breaks, packing it in with both hands, using his body weight to hold the pressure steady. The gel was designed for human-scale wounds. Using it on something this large was like trying to patch a cracked wall with a tube of glue. But it held. The bleeding along her left side slowed to a seep instead of a pour. He moved to her collapsed lung next. There was no surgical option. He did not have the tools for that, and even if he had, cutting into a veil theory was not something any sane person attempted without a full medical team and 3 weeks of preparation. But he had watched years ago an old medic on a border station treat a Grethely with a partially collapsed air sac using nothing but external pressure and positioning. The principle was the same. He repositioned her head, tilting it slightly, clearing her airway. He found the area on her chest that corresponded roughly to where the collapsed lung should be and began applying slow, steady rhythmic pressure with both palms, not hard enough to cause damage, just enough to help the tissue remember what it was supposed to do. It took 11 minutes. Then her breathing changed. Just slightly. The wet, dragging quality of it eased a fraction. Not fixed. Not even close to fixed. But different. Less desperate. Dr. Soren unfolded his arms. He did not say anything. He just unfolded his arms and took one small step forward, watching the scanner readings with an expression that was no longer quite as flat as it had been. Ewan moved to the fluid around her heart next. He had nothing that could drain it. But there was a pressure technique, one he had read about once in an old medical paper on large body trauma, written by a human doctor who had spent 30 years working on mining planets where the equipment was always wrong for the job, that could slow the buildup if applied correctly to the exterior chest wall. He found the position. He began. Kale crouched down beside him after a while. What can I do? He asked. Hold this, Ewan said, and handed him a brace of thermal gel to keep pressed against the dragon's shoulder. Kale took it without question and held it with both hands, leaning his whole weight into it. Petra watched from a few steps back, her arms folded tight across her chest, her jaw set. The rain eased a little as the storm began to move on. The light changed from gray to a dull, watery silver. The hatchlings had stopped moving around. 2 of them had fallen into an exhausted, restless sleep against their mother's side. The smallest one was still awake, still watching Ewan with those pale, quiet eyes, tracking every move he made. It was Dr. Soren who broke the silence. Her vital decline has slowed, he said. He was looking at the scanner, and his voice had changed in a way that was subtle but real. Less flat, more careful, the way a person sounds when they are no longer completely certain of something they were certain of before. I don't know how, but it has slowed. Good, Ewan said, not looking up. It is not good in the sense that she is improving, Dr. Soren said quickly. It is good only in the sense that she is dying slightly less fast than she was. That is not the same thing as. I know, Ewan said. He sat back on his heels and looked at the dragon properly. He had done what he could reach. He had done what his hands could do from the outside. And the quiet part of his brain that never stopped working, the part that ran through problems even when the rest of him was focused on something else, that part had been working on something for the last 40 minutes and had just now put it together. Something was wrong beneath the surface. The smell had not gone away. That deep burning smell like hot iron and scorched wet stone. If anything, it was stronger now, rising from the center of her body, from somewhere around her chest and stomach. And her temperature, he had felt it when he pressed his palms against her chest wall, was wrong. Not the warmth of a living body. Something hotter. Something building. He pressed his scanner slowly along her abdomen. The reading came back and he looked at it. Then he looked at it again. He stood up slowly and walked to Dr. Soren and held the scanner out without a word. Dr. Soren took it. He read the screen. His expression, which had been carefully controlled for the past hour, did something complicated. His eyes moved across the data twice, 3 times. Her fire organs, he said quietly. Yes, Yuan said. Dr. Soren looked up. For the first time since he had arrived in the crater, his voice lost its flatness completely. They are leaking internally. The lining must have ruptured in the crash. He looked down at the dragon, then back at the scanner. The combustion fluid is pooling inside the body cavity. She is burning from the inside, Yuan said. The crater was quiet except for the last of the rain and the soft sound of the hatchlings breathing. Dr. Soren lowered the scanner slowly. He looked at Yuan with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite respect but lived somewhere in the uncomfortable space between them. There is no record, he said, of any physician of any species ever successfully treating a ruptured Veiltheri fire organ. Not one. In the entire history of coalition medicine. Yuan looked at the dragon. He looked at the smallest hatchling, still watching him, still waiting. Then I suppose, Yuan said quietly, picking up his kit, we are going to write the first one. The comm unit buzzed. Yuan looked at it for a moment, then picked it up. The voice on the other end belonged to Commander Aldrich, the regional coalition field supervisor. A man Yuan had spoken to exactly twice before, both times in formal briefings, both times through a screen. His voice was the kind of voice that was used to being listened to. Come. Certain. The voice of someone who had given orders for so long that the idea of those orders not being followed had simply stopped occurring to him. Medic Yuan, Aldrich said. I have been briefed on your current situation. I want you to step away from the animal and wait for extraction. Yuan was already on his knees beside the dragon, his scanner running slow passes across her abdomen, mapping the spread of the leaked combustion fluid inside her body cavity. He did not stand up. Sir, he said, the animal is in critical condition. If I step away now she will be dead within the hour. I understand that, Aldrich said. But what you are proposing is not a sanctioned medical procedure. The Veiltheri are a protected species under coalition law, Section 44, Paragraph 9. Any intervention beyond basic observation requires a full species ethics review, which takes a minimum of 30 days. Furthermore, you do not have the training, the equipment, or the authorization to perform internal treatment on a large protected species. You are a field medic, not a xenosurgeon. Yes, sir, Yuan said. Then you understand why I am asking you to stand down. Yuan looked at the fire organ readings on his scanner. The combustion fluid had spread further in the last 20 minutes. Her internal temperature was still climbing. Slow but climbing. The body was trying to contain it and failing, the same way a dam tries to hold water that has already found the cracks. Sir, he said, she has hatchlings. 3 of them. They are too young to survive without her. Pause. That is unfortunate, Aldrich said. But it does not change the legal situation. No, Yuan agreed. It doesn't. Good. Then. But it changes mine. Silence on the line. Yuan set the comm unit down on a flat rock beside him, carefully, the way you set something down when you are not throwing it but you are also not picking it up again. He could hear Aldrich's voice continuing from the speaker, words coming out in the flat certain tone of someone explaining consequences. He did not turn it off. He just stopped listening to it and went back to work. Behind him, nobody moved. Petra was standing with her arms at her sides, her face unreadable. Kale was looking at the comm unit, then at Yuan, then back at the comm unit. Dr. Soren had his scanner raised but was not looking at it. All 3 of them were very still, the way people go still when something is happening that they do not yet know how to respond to. Yuan turned and looked at them. She has children, he said. His voice was quiet and plain, no heat in it, no drama. She is suffering. That is enough for me. He looked at each of them in turn. You do not have to stay. I will not think less of you if you go back to the ship and wait. But I am going to try to help her, and I need to focus, so if you are staying I need you present and if you are going I need you gone. Nobody moved. Kale was the first to speak. What do you need me to do? Yuan nodded once. He turned back to the dragon. The problem was specific. The combustion fluid, the biological compound that Veiltheri fire organs produced and stored, the same fluid that allowed them to generate and release flame, had been leaking from a ruptured section of the organ lining since the crash. It had been pooling slowly inside the body cavity for what Yuan estimated was at least 6 hours. The longer it sat, the more it reacted with surrounding tissue, burning through it the way acid burns through cloth, slowly and completely. The dragon's body was fighting it, but losing. She could not fight and survive her other injuries at the same time. There was too much damage and not enough left of her to carry it all. The fluid had to come out. In human medicine, there was a procedure used in severe burn cases involving ruptured internal vessels, a field drainage technique that used careful external pressure combined with a small release point to allow damaging fluid to exit the body in a controlled way rather than continuing to spread. It was a rough procedure. It was not pretty. It was the kind of thing that got done in the field when the alternative was doing nothing and watching someone die. Ewan had performed it twice on humans. He had never performed it on anything else. He had certainly never performed it on a dragon. But the principle was the same. The scale was not. He needed a release point, a small, precise opening in the outer body wall through which the fluid could be guided out. A scalpel would not do it. The Veiltheri scales were harder than most metals. Even the cracked ones had edges that would blunt a surgical blade in seconds. He needed something that could cut through quickly and cleanly, with enough control that he could stop the moment he was through the outer layer. He looked at Kale. Get the plasma cutter from the survey pack. Kale blinked. The survey one? That is for cutting rock samples. I know what it is for, Ewan said. Bring it. Kale brought it. Ewan held it and looked at it for a moment. It was a small tool, handheld, designed for precise cuts in geological fieldwork. The beam width was adjustable. At its narrowest setting it was, technically, not entirely unlike certain surgical cutting instruments used in large-body veterinary procedures on the outer colonies. Technically. He adjusted it to the narrowest setting. Dr. Soren stepped forward. His voice was low. Ewan. If you miss the depth, if you go even slightly too deep, you will rupture the organ completely. The fluid will release all at once internally. She will die in seconds. I know, Ewan said. The margin is. I know, Ewan said again and looked at Dr. Soren steadily. Are you going to help me or not? A very long pause. Then Dr. Soren reached into his own kit and pulled out a set of fluid guides, thin tubes used for directing and channeling biological drainage in large species field care. He had brought them without explanation and Ewan had not asked. He held them out. You will need these, he said quietly, to direct the flow once you have the opening. Ewan took them. He positioned himself carefully. He found the location on her abdomen that the scanner had identified, the lowest point of fluid accumulation, away from the main organ, where the concentration was highest and the tissue around it was already compromised. He marked it with a line of sterile chalk from his kit, the way surgeons mark a site before they begin. He looked at the hatchlings. Two still asleep. The smallest one watching him. He looked at the dragon's face. Her eye was closed. Her breathing was the worst it had been, short, shallow, barely there, the sound of something running out of time. He looked at Petra. Hold her still if she moves. As best you can. Petra nodded, though her expression made it clear she understood that holding a dragon still was not something a human could actually do. She moved to the dragon's shoulder and placed both hands flat against the scales. Ewan took one breath. Then he made the cut. It was fast. One precise motion, narrow and controlled, just through the outer scale layer and the membrane beneath. He felt the resistance, felt the moment it gave, pulled the cutter back immediately and pressed the first fluid guide into the opening before anything else could happen. For 2 seconds nothing happened. Then the fluid came. It was dark and it smoked faintly in the cold air and it smelled like burning iron and it ran along the guides and away from the body in a thin, steady stream, and Ewan held the guides in place with both hands and did not move and did not breathe and watched the scanner reading that Kale was holding up beside him. The internal temperature stopped climbing. It held. Then, slowly it began to fall. And then the dragon screamed. It was a single sound, enormous and raw, starting low and rising until it shook the water off the leaves above them and rolled out through the trees in every direction. Kale stumbled backward. Petra grabbed the dragon's shoulder with everything she had. Dr. Soren dropped his scanner and then picked it up again with shaking hands. The scream stopped. Silence. Then, breathing. Deep, slow, steady. Each breath full and even and real, the sound of lungs remembering what they were made to do. Her chest rose and fell with a rhythm that had not been there an hour ago. The scanner in Kale's hands showed numbers still bad, still far from anything like healthy, but no longer falling. Holding. Stable. Dr. Soren read the screen for a long time without speaking. Then he said very quietly, "She is not dying." Ewan sat back in the mud. His hands were shaking. He had not noticed that until now. He pressed them flat against his knees and looked at the dragon and let out a breath that had been sitting in his chest for what felt like a very long time. The smallest hatchling made a soft sound. Then it walked forward, 3 small careful steps through the mud, and pressed its tiny head against Ewan's arm. He did not move. He just sat there in the rain and the mud and the quiet and let it. 3 days passed. The storm was gone. The forest moon had settled into a quiet, pale calm, the kind of stillness that comes after something loud and violent has moved on and left the world deciding what shape it wants to take next. The trees were still. The air smelled like wet earth and green things growing. Thin light came down through the canopy in long soft columns, and where it touched the ground it made the puddles shine like pieces of broken mirror. The crater did not look the same as it had 3 days ago. Petra had arranged for the team's portable shelters to be moved to the crater's edge. 2 of the survey pack mules had been repurposed to carry supplies down the slope. Someone, Kale most likely, had cleared a flat area of broken wood and debris near the dragon's resting place and laid down a layer of insulating ground sheet. There was a small camp stove set up under a waterproof sheet. There were boots drying near it and a row of medical equipment arranged neatly along a flat rock and 3 empty meal packets that had been crushed and left beside a pack. It had stopped feeling like a crash site. It had started feeling, in a quiet and unplanned way, like somewhere people lived. Alba was awake. She had opened her eyes fully for the first time on the morning of the second day. Not just a single pale eye tracking a single person. Both eyes, open, clear, taking in the camp around her with slow and careful attention. She had not moved much. Her body was still healing in ways that would take far longer than 3 days to complete. Her wing was splinted with survey poles and thermal wrap. Her left side was packed with gel and covered in a loose dressing that Ewan changed every morning and every evening. She could lift her head. She could shift her weight. She could turn slowly from one side to the other with effort. She could not yet stand. But she was awake. And from the moment she was fully awake, her eyes followed Ewan. It was not dramatic. It was not the wide, intense stare of an animal tracking something it wants to eat or something it is afraid of. It was quieter than that. Calmer. When Ewan moved around the camp, her gaze moved with him, the same way a person's eyes follow someone they are paying attention to in a room full of other things happening. When he was close, she was still. When he moved away to the far side of the camp, her head turned slowly and tracked him until he came back. Kale noticed it on the second day. He said nothing about it, but Ewan caught him watching with a small, careful expression that was somewhere between curious and moved. The hatchlings had made themselves completely at home. Within 24 hours of Alba becoming conscious and calm, all 3 of them had spread out from her side and begun exploring the camp with the fearless, tireless energy of very young creatures who have not yet learned that the world contains things worth being cautious about. They investigated everything. They pulled at loose equipment cables with their small teeth. They climbed on the pack mules until the mules made unhappy sounds and they climbed off again. They chased each other around Ewan's tent in circles until one of them crashed into a supply box and knocked it sideways, scattering ration packs across the ground. The smallest one had decided that Ewan was its favorite thing in the camp. It followed him. Everywhere. When he was working it sat beside him and watched his hands. When he was eating it sat beside him and watched his food until he gave it a piece of whatever he was having, which he always did and which Dr. Soren said was probably not advisable from a dietary standpoint and which Ewan ignored completely. When he slept it curled against the outside of his tent, pressed against the fabric, a warm solid weight that he could feel through the thin wall. He had stopped being surprised by this. He had started checking for it before he closed his eyes, and on the one night it was not there, it had wandered to sleep against its mother instead. He had lain awake for 10 minutes before admitting to himself that he was listening for it. He had not given the other 2 hatchlings names. But the smallest one he had started calling Pip, quietly to himself, in a way he did not announce to anyone but which Kale had definitely heard at least once because Kale had smiled and then looked very carefully at the sky. Ewan could not speak Alba's language. The Veil Theory did not communicate the way most coalition species did. There were no words. There was no translation matrix that covered them. The few that existed were incomplete and largely theoretical, built from observation rather than any actual recorded communication. What the Veil Theory used was something older and more physical than language. Low vibrations that moved through the ground and the air. The position of the head, the neck, the tail. The angle of the wings when they were extended. The particular quality of the sounds they made, not words, but something that carried meaning the way music carries feeling, in a way you understood without being able to explain how. Ewan could not speak it. But he started, without planning to, learning to read it. It happened gradually, the way all real learning happens. Not in one moment but in dozens of small ones, each one adding to the last. He noticed that when Alba's tail moved in a slow, low sweep, she was calm. When it stilled completely, she was paying very close attention to something. When her head tilted left, she was asking a question, or something that felt like a question, something that carried the same quality as one. When she made the low sound in the back of her throat, the one that was more vibration than noise, and held it for a long moment. It meant something was wrong or something hurt or something needed attention. When she made a shorter, softer version of that same sound, directed at the hatchlings, it meant something like come here or you are safe or I am here. She made that sound at Yuan once, on the evening of the third day, when he was sitting beside her changing her dressing and his hands were cold from the night air, and she felt it when he pressed the fresh gel against her side. He stopped what he was doing and looked at her. She looked back. He was not entirely sure what had just happened. But it sat in his chest in a way that was warm and a little overwhelming, and he kept his eyes on the dressing and finished the job and said nothing and was glad it was getting dark so no one could see his face clearly. It was Dr. Soren who came to him on the evening of the third day. He walked across the camp with his hands behind his back, which was what he did when he was thinking carefully about something. He stopped beside Yuan, who was sitting on a flat rock near Alba's head, updating his medical log. For a moment Dr. Soren said nothing. He looked at Alba. He looked at the hatchlings. He looked at Pip, asleep against Yuan's left boot. Then he sat down on the rock beside Yuan, which was unusual, because Dr. Soren did not generally sit on rocks. I have been reviewing your procedure notes, he said. I know, Yuan said. You asked for them yesterday. I have read them 4 times, Dr. Soren said. Yuan looked up. Dr. Soren was looking at Alba, his expression serious and quiet and carrying something in it that it took Yuan a moment to identify. It was not pity. It was not professional admiration exactly. It was something more honest than both of those things. It was the look of someone confronting the fact that they were wrong about something they were very sure of. The external pressure sequencing you used on her collapsed lung, Dr. Soren said. The fluid guide placement angle for the fire organ drainage. The thermal gel layering pattern on her scale fractures. He paused. None of these are in any medical record I have access to. I searched the full Coalition Xenobiology database. I searched the Independent Medical Archive. I searched 3 historical field medicine repositories going back 60 years. He turned and looked at Yuan directly. This procedure does not exist anywhere. Not in pieces. Not in similar forms. Not in theoretical proposals. Nowhere. Yuan said nothing. You invented it, Dr. Soren said. In a crater. In the rain. With a field medic kit and a rock-cutting tool. He looked back at Alba. And it worked. The camp was quiet around them. The night sounds of the forest moon had started up, soft and distant and layered, the kind of sounds that made silence feel full rather than empty. She was dying, Yuan said simply. Yes, Dr. Soren said. And she had children. Yes, Dr. Soren said again. Neither of them said anything else for a while. Alba's breathing was slow and deep and even beside them. Pip made a small sound in its sleep and pressed closer against Yuan's boot. Dr. Soren stood up after a while, straightened his coat and picked up his scanner. He looked down at Yuan with that same complicated expression. I told you she could not be saved, he said. You did, Yuan agreed. I was wrong. Yes, Yuan said without any sharpness in it, without any satisfaction. Just the plain word, offered and accepted between 2 people who both understood what it meant. Dr. Soren nodded once. Then he walked back across the camp, hands behind his back again, already thinking about something else. Yuan looked at Alba. Her pale eyes were open, catching the last of the light. She was looking at him the way she always looked at him now, that steady, quiet, paying attention look that he had stopped trying to interpret and started simply accepting, the way you accept the warmth of a fire without needing to explain why it feels good to sit near one. He went back to his medical log. Pip slept on against his boot. And somewhere above the trees, the first stars of the moon's night came out one by one, slow and certain, like they had always been there and always would be. The hearing room was cold. It was the kind of cold that had nothing to do with temperature. The walls were pale gray. The lights were bright and flat and came from everywhere at once, the kind of lighting designed to make sure nothing was hidden and no one was comfortable. The floor was polished to a shine that reflected everything back in a slightly wrong way, stretched and distorted, like a version of the room that existed just beneath the real one. Yuan sat alone at a single table in the center of the room. In front of him, raised on a long curved platform, sat 5 members of the Coalition Disciplinary Panel. 3 humans. 1 Chethely. 1 Grethely. They wore formal gray coats with rank markings on the collar. Their faces were the practiced faces of people who spent a great deal of time making decisions about other people's lives and had learned to do it without letting anything show. The panel head was a human woman named Commissioner Voss. She was perhaps 60, with short silver hair and reading glasses she kept taking off and putting back on. She did not look unkind. She looked like someone who had read a great many files and had long ago stopped being surprised by what people did. She read the charges aloud. Insubordination. Unauthorized medical intervention on a protected species. Destruction of coalition survey equipment. Deliberate disregard of a direct order from a senior commanding officer. Violation of Coalition Protected Species Directive, Section 44, Paragraph 9. She read each one clearly and set the document down and looked at Ewan over the top of her glasses. How do you respond to these charges? She asked. Ewan sat up straight. His hands were flat on the table in front of him. He was wearing his standard field uniform, clean and pressed, because Petra had made him change out of his camp clothes before the transport came and he had not argued. He looked at Commissioner Voss and then at each of the other 4 panel members and then back at her. They are accurate, he said. A small silence. One of the other panel members, a heavy-set human man with a thick gray beard, leaned forward slightly. You are confirming that you committed all listed violations? Yes, Ewan said. You are not disputing any part of the charges? No. The bearded man leaned back. The Chethely panel member made a note. Commissioner Voss took her glasses off, looked at them, put them back on. Then let the record show, she said carefully, that the respondent has confirmed all charges as stated. She looked at Ewan. You may speak to the circumstances if you wish. Ewan thought about it for a moment. A mother was dying, he said. She had 3 children who were too young to survive without her. I had the knowledge and the means to try to help her, and I chose to use them. He paused. I would do it again. The room was quiet. Commissioner Voss wrote something down. The hearing was supposed to move to the evidence review phase next. The documentation, the scanner logs, the comm recordings of Commander Aldrich's order and Ewan's non-response. It was all prepared. It was all very clear. The case on paper was straightforward. Then the door opened. Everyone looked. Dr. Soren walked in. He was wearing his formal physician's coat, the long charcoal gray one with the silver medical insignia on the breast that Ewan had never seen him wear before. He was carrying a document case under one arm and walking with the particular posture of someone who has decided something and is no longer open to discussion about it. He walked to the front of the room, nodded to the panel and said, I am Dr. Soren, Chief Medical Officer of Survey Team 14. I request permission to submit evidence and testimony in relation to this case. Commissioner Voss looked at him for a moment. This hearing was not scheduled to include witnesses. No, Dr. Soren agreed. I scheduled myself. Another silence. Then the commissioner gestured to a chair beside Ewan's table. Sit down, Doctor. Dr. Soren sat. He opened his document case and placed a stack of carefully organized files on the table. Ewan looked at them. They were thick. Dr. Soren had been busy. He presented his evidence without drama and without rushing. He walked the panel through the complete medical record, Alba's injuries on arrival, the projected survival timeline, the specific nature of the ruptured fire organ and what it meant for the dragon's internal condition. He explained, in plain and precise language, that the dragon would have been dead within 4 to 6 hours without intervention. He explained that no existing coalition medical protocol covered the situation. He submitted his own professional assessment that Ewan's field drainage procedure was not only effective but represented a genuine and original contribution to xenobiological medicine. In 22 years of practice, Dr. Soren said looking at the panel, I have not seen a field procedure of this complexity performed without preparation, without specialized equipment and without precedent. What Ewan did in that crater was not reckless. It was, by any honest medical measure, extraordinary. The bearded panel member was frowning, but it was the frown of someone paying close attention, not the frown of someone who had already decided. Then the door opened again. Petra walked in. Behind her came Cale, his survey team jacket still slightly muddy at the hem, his young face serious and set. They both walked to the front of the room and stood. Survey team leader Petra said. I also request permission to speak. Commissioner Voss looked at the ceiling briefly as if asking it a question. Then she looked back. It appears we are doing this. Sit down. They sat. Petra spoke plainly. She described the moment Ewan had set the comm down. She described what he had said, she has children, she is suffering, that is enough, and she said it the way people repeat words that have stuck in them somewhere, words that do not leave. She told the panel that she had been ready to follow the order herself, that she had believed Dr. Soren when he said it was hopeless, and that watching Ewan work had changed something in her understanding of what hopeless actually meant. Cale spoke last. He was nervous, his hands were not quite still and he knew it, but his voice was steady. He told the panel about holding the thermal gel in the rain for 40 minutes while Ewan worked. He told them about the moment the dragon screamed and the moment after it when the breathing changed. He told them about the smallest hatchling pressing against Ewan's arm in the mud when it was over. "I've been on 6 survey missions," Cale said. "I have never seen anything like it. I don't think I will again." He paused. "I don't think the charges are wrong exactly. I think the law didn't account for a situation like this one. And I think if we punish someone for doing the right thing because the law didn't account for it, we should at least be honest about what we're doing." The room was quiet for a long moment after he finished. Commissioner Voss took her glasses off and set them on the desk and rubbed the bridge of her nose. The panel members were murmuring quietly to one another. The Grethely member, who had said nothing at all until this point, was reading back through Dr. Soren's files with an expression of deep focus. Then the room's main communication panel chimed. Everyone looked at it. The duty officer by the door checked the source and his expression changed in a way that made the room pay attention. "Commissioner," he said carefully, "there is an incoming formal communication. It is flagged as originating from the Veiltheri Elder Council." Complete silence. Commissioner Voss stared at the duty officer. "Confirm that." "Confirmed, Commissioner. Authentication markers check out. It is genuine." The bearded panel member said very quietly, "That is not possible. The Veiltheri Elder Council has not issued a formal communication to a coalition body in over 40 years. Apparently," the Grethely panel member said, with a calm that suggested they found this all extremely interesting, "they have now." The message was put on screen. It was short. It had been translated from the Veiltheri formal communication structure, which was ancient and rarely used and took 3 senior translation AIs working together to render into standard language. The translation was clean and simple and left no room for interpretation. It said, "The one called Ewan acted with honor. He is known to us now. He is not to be touched." That was all. 7 words of statement and 7 words of instruction, and the weight of a species older than the coalition itself sitting behind every single one of them. Nobody spoke for a very long time. Then Commissioner Voss picked her glasses up, looked at them, and set them down again without putting them on. She looked at Ewan. He looked back. Her face had changed, not dramatically, not into something soft or warm exactly, but into something more honest. The formal mask that the room and the platform and the flat bright lights required had slipped, just slightly, just enough. "The panel will deliberate," she said. They deliberated for 11 minutes. When they came back, the charges were dropped. All of them. Commissioner Voss read the decision in a clear, steady voice and did not editorialize and did not explain, and the other panel members signed the record, and that was that. Ewan walked out of the hearing room into a corridor that smelled like recycled air and floor polish and felt, after the cold gray stillness of the room behind him, almost warm. His team was waiting. Petra. Kel. And Dr. Soren, standing slightly apart from the other 2 with his document case under his arm and his hands clasped behind his back. Nobody said anything for a moment. Petra put her hand briefly on Ewan's shoulder and then took it away. Cale let out a long breath like he had been holding it since they walked in. Ewan looked at each of them and felt something in his chest that was big and quiet and did not have a clean name. Then Dr. Soren stepped forward and held out a single document. Ewan took it and read the title. It was a research proposal. Joint authorship, Coalition Medical Division and the Veiltheri Elder Council. A combination of names that had never appeared on the same document in the history of either body. The project concerned xenobiological field medicine, large protected species emergency care, and the development of the first formal Veiltheri treatment protocols. At the bottom, under the heading of Lead Field Consultant, was a single name. Ewan. He read it twice. Then he looked up at Dr. Soren. "You wrote this," Ewan said. "I submitted the proposal," Dr. Soren said carefully. "The Elder Council agreed to it this morning. Their agreement is what prompted the communication to the hearing." He paused. "You are the first human ever given that title on a joint coalition Veiltheri document." Ewan looked down at the paper again. "I am a field medic," he said. "Yes," Dr. Soren said. "You are also, apparently, the person who invented a procedure that saved a Veiltheri life and has now been formally requested by the Elder Council to help build a framework so it never has to be invented again in a crater in the rain." He tilted his head slightly. "I thought you might accept." Ewan stood in the corridor with the document in his hands and the flat overhead lights humming above him and his team around him and the weight of something large and real and good settling into him like the first deep breath after a long time of not quite breathing. "Yes," he said quietly. He accepted. The transport was scheduled for mid-morning. Ewan arrived at the Forest Moon just before dawn. He had not planned it that way. The shuttle from the relay station had made better time than expected through the outer corridor, and when it broke through the cloud layer and the moon's surface came up beneath him in the gray pre-light, he had looked down at the dark shape of the forest and felt something pull in his chest that he did not try to name or explain. He just asked the pilot to land at the survey coordinates, and the pilot, who had heard enough of the story by now to ask no questions, did exactly that. He walked the rest of the way alone. The forest was quiet in the way it only is in the hour before sunrise, when the night creatures have gone still and the day creatures have not yet started, and the world sits in a pocket of pure silence that belongs to no particular time. His boots were quiet on the soft ground. The trees rose around him enormous and dark, their upper branches lost in the low mist. Water dripped from the leaves in slow, irregular drops that caught the faint light and fell without sound into the earth below. He found the path down to the crater without needing to look for it. His feet remembered. He came over the edge of the slope and stopped. Alba was already there. She was standing, fully upright, all four legs beneath her, in the center of the crater floor. Her splint was gone. Her dressings were gone. The cracks in her scales had healed to thin silver lines that caught the dim light and held it, running across the white of her like rivers on a map, like the marks that hard things leave when they have been broken and have grown back together. She was not the same as she had been before the crash. She would never be exactly that again. But she was standing, and she was whole, and in the pale gray light of the forest moon's early morning she was the most extraordinary thing Ewan had ever seen. She was looking directly at him. He stopped at the bottom of the slope and they looked at each other across the quiet crater floor, and neither of them moved for a moment. The mist moved between them slowly. Somewhere far above in the trees a bird made one soft sound and went silent again. Then the hatchlings found him. He heard them before he saw them, the quick scramble of small claws on wet ground, coming from the left, coming fast. Then all three of them hit him more or less simultaneously, which was something he should have been prepared for given that they were 3 times the size they had been a month ago and considerably more coordinated. He staggered back one step and caught himself, and then he was completely covered in young dragons, 2 of them climbing his arms and one of them, Pip, unmistakably Pip, pressing in under his left arm with the same stubborn insistence that had been there since the very first night, pushing its head hard against his chest and making the low soft sound that he had come to understand meant something like "You are here and I knew you would be." He wrapped his arms around as much of them as he could reach. He stood there in the mud at the bottom of the crater with 3 growing Veilfairy hatchlings climbing on him, and held on and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would have added to it. When they finally settled, draped across his shoulders, pressed against his sides, Pip still anchored against his chest, he looked up and found that Alba had moved closer. She stood a few meters away now, her great head lowered slightly, watching him with those pale ice and gold eyes that he had learned to read over weeks of mornings and evenings sitting beside her in the camp. She was calm. She was at ease. But there was something in the set of her head, the particular stillness of her tail, that told him she understood what today was. That she had understood it when she woke this morning. That perhaps she had understood it before he had, which would not have surprised him at all. He gently moved the hatchlings aside. They complained, all 3 of them, in the small grumbling way of creatures that know they are not really being refused, only asked to wait, and he walked toward her. He stopped when he was close. Close enough to see the individual healed lines crossing her scales. Close enough to see the slow rise and fall of her breathing. Close enough that when she exhaled, the warm air moved against his face like a breath from something ancient and true. He reached out and placed his hand flat against the side of her neck, the way he had on the very first night. 2 fingers searching for a pulse that had been too slow and too uneven and had frightened him in a way he had not admitted to anyone. He found it now. Strong. Steady. Unhurried. The deep, certain beat of something that was supposed to be alive and was. He stood there with his hand against her neck and breathed. Then Alba moved. She lowered her head slowly all the way down, until her great white forehead was level with his. She moved forward one careful step and pressed it gently against him. Her forehead against his. Warm and smooth and solid, the healed scales cool at first and then warming quickly where they touched his skin. She pressed gently and held it there and did not move. Ewan closed his eyes. He did not know what it meant in the full language of her people. He did not know if there was a word for it or a ceremony around it or a history of what it signified between Veilfairy. He only knew what it felt like, and what it felt like was this. It felt like being seen completely, without any part of yourself hidden, and being held as worthy. It felt like a thing given freely by someone who owed you nothing and chose to give it anyway. It felt like the end of something and the beginning of something else, and the quiet moment between the two where both things exist at once. He stood there and let it be exactly what it was. After a long moment, Alba lifted her head and stepped back. She looked at him once more, steady and clear, and then she turned and made the low soft sound that meant come, and the hatchlings came immediately, falling in around her legs, jostling each other, Pip pausing to look back at Ewan one last time with those enormous pale eyes before turning and following its mother. Ewan stood in the middle of the crater and watched them go. The transport had arrived at the crater's upper edge while they were saying goodbye. It was a Veiltheri vessel. Nothing like a coalition ship, nothing angular or mechanical. It was long and smooth and pale, shaped like something that had grown rather than been built, and it sat at the crater's rim with a silence that felt respectful rather than empty. Two Veiltheri handlers stood at the entrance, tall and still, watching the approach of Alba and her young without moving. Alba walked up the slope without looking back. The hatchlings followed. The two larger ones went without hesitation, bounding up the slope with the energy of creatures going toward something new. Pip went more slowly. At the entrance to the transport it stopped and turned and looked down into the crater one final time. Ewan raised one hand. Pip looked at him for a long moment with those quiet pale eyes. Then it turned and went inside and the entrance closed without sound. The transport lifted. It made no noise. It simply rose, smooth and certain, up through the mist and the low clouds, and then it was gone and the sky above the forest moon was empty and still, and the birds in the trees above the crater began, one by one, to start their mourning. Ewan stood alone in the crater for a while. He was not sure how long. Long enough that the light changed from gray to gold and came down through the canopy in the long soft columns he remembered from the mornings he had sat beside Alba while she healed. Long enough that the mud dried slightly around his boots. Long enough that the thing sitting in his chest settled from something sharp and present into something quieter, something he could carry. Then he climbed the slope and went back to work. Months later he was on a planet 3 sectors away, deep in the early stages of the joint research project, working late in a small field office with papers spread across every surface and 3 different medical databases open on his screen. It was a good kind of busy. The kind that means something is being built. A junior team member knocked and came in holding a small package. "Arrived for you," she said. No sender name. Just a council marker. She set it on the desk and left. Ewan looked at it for a moment. Then he opened it. Inside, resting on a folded piece of plain cloth, was a single scale. White. Smooth. Roughly the length of his hand, curved slightly at the edges the way scales are when they have grown naturally and been given freely rather than taken. He picked it up carefully. It was warm. Not the warmth of a package that had been sitting in sunlight. Something deeper than that. Something that stayed. There was no note. He sat for a long time at his desk with the scale in both hands, the databases glowing quietly around him, the night sounds of an alien planet coming in soft through the window. He thought about a crater in the rain. About a pale eye opening in the dark and looking at him not with fear but with the quiet, unbearable honesty of something that had accepted its end. He thought about the smell of burning and the sound of 3 small creatures crying. He thought about hands shaking in the mud after it was over and a small warm weight pressing against his boot in the dark. He thought about a white forehead pressed gently against his in the early morning light. He set the scale down carefully on the desk beside his work, where he could see it. Where it would be there when he looked up. He went back to what he was building. Outside, the alien stars came out one by one in a sky he was still learning the name of, quiet and distant and very bright, and somewhere beneath a different sky, under stars that had watched over ancient things long before the coalition had a name, a mother and her children were alive and whole and home. And that, as it had always been, was enough.